The sound of her laughter was the first thing that made him doubt. It wasn't loud, not even careless, just soft and private. The kind of sound people make when they forget they're being watched. He heard it from the living room, drifting down the hall like perfume. Followed by a man's voice, low, familiar, not his father's. When he stepped closer, he saw her through the half-open door. She was standing near the window, sunlight caught in her hair. Her hand brushing against the man's. The movement was brief, but the son saw everything. The ring, the one she'd worn since the day she'd married his father, was gone. Her fingers were bare. He stepped back before they noticed him. The laughter died, replaced by murmurs he couldn't quite make out. His pulse thundered in his ears. He walked upstairs, every step heavy with the weight of a truth he wasn't ready to carry. Later that evening, he watched her slide the ring back on before dinner. The gesture was deliberate, almost theatrical. She sat across from his father, smiling in all the right moments, touching his hand as if nothing had changed. The son looked at the circle of gold on her finger and thought about what it meant, or rather, what it didn't. Days passed, then weeks, but he couldn't forget that image of her bare hand. It began to haunt him, the absence of the ring, the false comfort of its return. Every time she reached for a glass or brushed her hair aside, his eyes found the gold band and burned with quiet fury. He started watching her closely, memorizing her patterns. The late-night phone calls she took in the kitchen. The subtle changes in perfume. The way her laughter, that same quiet, private laugh, returned whenever she thought she was alone. One night, while she was asleep, he took the ring from her dresser and turned it over in his hand. Inside, where most people engraved names or dates, there was nothing. Just smooth, cold metal. Empty. The next morning, she noticed it missing. Panic flickered across her face before she masked it with calm. "Have you seen my ring?" she asked. He met her gaze. "Maybe you left it with someone else." The color drained from her face. She didn't answer, just turned away and left the room. He didn't give it back. Not yet. He wanted her to feel the absence, to know what it meant to be stripped of her disguise. That night, he placed the ring on the kitchen table where his father would find it. When the older man came home and saw it lying there, he frowned. "Why isn't she wearing it?" he asked. The son didn't look up from his plate. "Maybe you should ask her." The confrontation came hours later, sharp voices, breaking glass, a door slamming. By morning, the woman was gone. The father sat at the table, his hands folded, the ring glinting between them like a cruel joke. "She said it didn't mean anything anymore," he murmured. "Can you imagine that? All these years and it meant nothing." The son didn't know how to answer. He wanted to tell him that he had already known, that he had seen her without it. That the ring had always been a prop, something she wore not out of love but obligation. Instead, he said quietly, "Maybe it meant something once." His father looked at him, eyes hollow. If it did, she forgot. In the weeks that followed, the son found the ring on the mantel, still polished, still shining, as if waiting for a hand that would never return. The sight of it made him angry, then tired. It was nothing but a piece of metal, but it held too much of everything they'd lost. One evening, he took it outside. The sky was low and gray, the air thick with the smell of rain. He walked to the edge of the garden, opened his hand, and let the ring fall into the dirt. It disappeared soundlessly. For the first time, he didn't feel vengeance burning inside him. Only release. When he told his father later, the man nodded slowly. "Maybe that's where it belongs," he said. in the ground, like something that once lived. After that, they stopped speaking of her entirely. The silence that followed was softer than before, not the silence of anger, but of healing. And sometimes, when the sun passed the garden, he thought of the ring lying beneath the soil, hidden from light, slowly fading back into the earth. It had meant nothing to her, yes. But to him, it had come to mean something else entirely, the end of pretending. The end of rage, the beginning of peace. The ring never stayed buried for long, not in his mind, not in the house. Every time it rained, he imagined the soil shifting, the gold glinting faintly beneath the surface like an unburied secret. The house had grown quieter since she left, but not cleaner. Silence, he realized, had its own kind of clutter. It filled corners, crept beneath doors, settled where love used to live. His father barely spoke anymore. The man still worked, still ate, still moved through his days, but with a kind of numb precision, as if life had become a list of small tasks to complete before sleep. The son tried to fill the emptiness with routine, cleaning, fixing, pretending. But some nights, when he passed the empty chair at the table, he'd think about the woman who had once sat there, the way she had laughed, the way the ring had glimmered on her hand. He told himself he hated her, but hate was too alive for what he felt. What remained was something quieter, heavier, a kind of fatigue that sat deep in his chest. One evening, while sorting through boxes in the attic, he found an old photo album tucked between blankets. It was from their wedding, her and his father, years ago, before he had even known her. The photos were faded, their smiles too bright, too certain. In every picture, the ring shone clearly, catching the light like a promise no one intended to keep. He stared at those photos for a long time. It struck him that she had probably meant it then, whatever it was she had promised. Maybe love, maybe stability, maybe the illusion of both. Somewhere along the way, the meaning had slipped, replaced by the need to be wanted, to feel alive again. And when that feeling faded, she had reached for something else. Someone else. He closed the album, not in anger, but in understanding. Later that week, he noticed his father digging in the garden, his movements slow, deliberate. "Looking for something?" he asked. The man didn't look up. "I found it," he said, holding out his hand. The gold ring sat in his palm, still bright despite the dirt. "You buried this." The sun froze. "I thought it was gone." His father studied it for a moment, then slipped it into his pocket. "Nothing ever really goes away," he murmured. "We just stop looking." That night, the son found the ring on the kitchen table again, the same way it had been the morning she left. His father had cleaned it, polished it until it gleamed. For a moment, it almost looked alive again. "What will you do with it?" the son asked. The father shrugged. "Maybe keep it. Not as a reminder of her, but of me, of the man who believed in something. Even if it turned out to be a lie." The son understood. Some symbols weren't about what they once meant. They were about what you chose to make of them afterward. Weeks later, when his father began wearing the ring on a chain around his neck, the son didn't question it. It suited him somehow, not as an emblem of marriage, but of survival. And when autumn came, and the first leaves began to fall, the son went out to the garden and stood where he had once buried it. The earth there was smooth again, covered in soft grass. He bent down, pressed his hand to the ground, and whispered, "It's over now." The wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and soil, a reminder that nothing ever really disappears. It only changes shape, just as pain turns to memory, and memory turns to something quieter. Acceptance. The ring had meant nothing to her. But to them, to the ones who stayed behind, it had become something else entirely. It had become proof that even broken vows could still leave behind a trace of something human. Winter settled in early that year, gray and slow, wrapping the house in a silence that no amount of warmth could lift. The father wore the ring on its chain beneath his shirt every day, touching it now and then as though checking if it still existed. The son never asked about it anymore. He didn't need to. Some gestures were explanations in themselves. The woman never came back. Not once. No letter, no apology, not even a rumor of her life elsewhere. Sometimes the son wondered if she'd really vanished or if she was simply living quietly somewhere, pretending the years inside this house had belonged to someone else. He hoped, in some distant part of himself, that she was miserable. But another part of him, the part that had grown tired of bitterness, hoped she was simply gone from pain altogether. He began taking long walks after dark, down the same roads she used to drive, through the same intersections she'd crossed every day. The town had changed little, but everything in it felt different, as if the air itself remembered. One night, he passed a jewelry shop. In the window was a small display of gold bands, catching the streetlight in their perfect, indifferent shine. They all looked the same. Empty circles, waiting for meaning that might never come. He found himself staring too long. A stranger beside him said, "Choosing one?" He almost laughed. "No," he said, "just remembering one." When he came home, the father was asleep on the couch, a book open on his chest. The chain around his neck had slipped into view, the ring catching the dim light of the lamp. The son sat across from him, watching the steady rhythm of his breathing, and thought about how much that small circle had survived. Lies, betrayal, silence, time. It was almost ironic. What had once symbolized love now represented endurance. The next morning, he found his father outside, staring at the sky. "I'm going to sell the ring," the man said suddenly. "Are you sure?" "It's just metal," he replied. "It's time to stop wearing ghosts." They drove to a pawnshop on the edge of town. The clerk examined the ring, weighing it in his palm. "Good piece," he said. "Simple. Old-fashioned?" The father nodded. "It was supposed to last forever." The man chuckled without malice. "Nothing does." When they left, the father didn't say how much he'd gotten for it, and the son didn't ask. What mattered wasn't the transaction. It was the quiet relief in his father's shoulders. The faint return of breath that sounded like the first exhale after years underwater. That night they ate dinner together without the usual silences. The son caught himself smiling once, and it startled him. Afterward, while washing the dishes, he glanced at the empty spot on his father's chest where the ring used to hang. It was strange how absence could feel cleaner than possession. Before bed, he stepped outside. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs. He looked toward the garden, the place where the ring had first been buried, unearthed, and buried again in memory if not in soil. He could still see the faint impression in the earth where he'd once knelt to hide it. He whispered into the night, not expecting an answer. "It's done now." Somewhere between the whisper and the wind, something inside him loosened. The ring had meant nothing to her. But to him, to the man he had become through its story, it had taught a cruel, necessary truth, that love without honesty is just a circle of gold, smooth and beautiful, but hollow inside. And as he walked back toward the house, the frost glimmered faintly beneath his feet. catching the light like 1,000 tiny rings, reminders that everything, even loss, could still shine for a moment before fading away. Spring returned with the kind of light that made old things look new again. The garden bloomed for the first time in years, wild and untamed, but beautiful in its own way. The father no longer wore the ring around his neck, and the son no longer thought of it buried or sold. It had simply become part of their story. Something that had passed through their lives and left its mark. He spent more time with his father now. They fixed the broken fence together, repainted the porch, shared small jokes that didn't carry the weight of old pain. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was peace, the kind that comes after a long storm, when you're finally too tired to keep fighting the wind. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, the son came across a small wooden box he didn't recognize. Inside was a collection of trinkets, faded photographs, a dried flower pressed in tissue, and a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was hers. "If anyone finds this, I hope the years have been kind to you. I know I took something I can never return. But there were moments, small ones, when I loved you both more than I could say. Maybe that doesn't matter now. Maybe it shouldn't. But I needed it written somewhere, just once, that it was real. Even if it didn't last." He sat there for a long time, the words blurring beneath his eyes. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a plea. It was something quieter, something almost human. For the first time, he didn't feel the sharp edge of betrayal when he thought of her, only the weary tenderness that comes with understanding too late. That evening, he showed the note to his father. The old man read it in silence, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he smiled, a sad, distant smile, but real. "She was always good with words," he said softly. "She just never knew how to live them." He handed the note back. "You keep it." The son folded it neatly and slipped it into his pocket. They didn't speak of her again that night. Later, when the sky turned deep blue and the first stars appeared, the son walked out to the garden. The grass was warm beneath his feet, the air full of the scent of blooming earth. He thought about the ring, the lie, the years of silence, all of it had led here. To this strange calm, to this fragile kind of forgiveness. He took the note from his pocket, read it one last time, then placed it in the soil beneath the small tree at the garden's edge. The same spot where the ring had once been buried. The earth received it quietly, as if it had been waiting. When he stood, he realized he wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at his father, not even at himself. The pain had thinned into something else, memory, maybe, or gratitude that it was finally over. Inside the house, his father's laughter drifted faintly through an open window. The sound surprised him, light and free in a way he hadn't heard in years. He smiled, turned once more toward the dark garden, and whispered, "We're all right now." The wind moved softly through the leaves, carrying the scent of new life, and somewhere, he liked to think, carrying her words too. Fading into the night like something forgiven at last. The ring had meant nothing to her. But to them, to those who stayed, it had come to mean everything. The proof that even broken promises can lead, in the end, to peace. By summer, the house no longer felt haunted. The air carried laughter again, quiet, unforced, the kind that came from small, ordinary joys. The father's health had begun to fade, but his spirit seemed lighter than it had been in years. The son often found him sitting on the porch, eyes half closed, the sunlight pooling gently over his hands. One afternoon, the son brought him tea and sat beside him. They watched the garden sway in the breeze, the small tree at its center full of green leaves. "You've stopped wearing the chain," the son said softly. The father smiled. "I buried it." The son blinked. "When?" "Last month," the older man said. "Same place you buried the ring. I figured it belonged there." They sat in silence for a while. It wasn't grief that filled the air now, but a strange kind of tenderness, like two people standing quietly where a fire had once burned, remembering the warmth without missing the flames. That evening, the son walked out to the garden. The earth where the ring had been buried was still marked by a small patch of darker soil. He crouched there, tracing the ground with his fingers. It felt soft, cool, alive. He thought about all the meanings that little piece of metal had carried: love, betrayal, revenge, and how, somehow, it had ended up meaning peace. When he came back inside, his father was asleep in his chair. On the table beside him lay a letter. The handwriting was weak but familiar. "For my son," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I've gone. I've spent most of my life trying to understand why people hurt the ones who love them. I used to think it was cruelty. Now I think it's fear, fear of fading, of not being seen. Your stepmother was afraid all her life. So was I, so were you. But I hope, by now, you've learned that love isn't about never breaking, it's about what we build after we've been broken." He read it twice, his chest tight but calm. The words didn't feel heavy, they felt like air finally released from a sealed room. A few weeks later, the father passed quietly. The funeral was simple. The son spoke only once, saying, "He taught me that even the things that end can still leave beauty behind." After everyone left, he returned to the garden. He stood where the ring and the chain were buried, the earth warm beneath his shoes. He thought about the woman who had betrayed them, the man who had forgiven her, and himself, the boy who had mistaken vengeance for justice and had learned, painfully, that they were never the same. He bent down and placed the letter in the soil beside the others. When he covered it, he whispered, "It's all right now." As he stood, a gust of wind moved through the branches, scattering sunlight across his face. For a moment, he thought he heard her laughter again, not the secret kind, not the cruel kind, but something softer, freer. It didn't hurt to hear it anymore. Years later, the tree had grown tall and strong. People who passed by the garden often stopped to admire it, not knowing what rested beneath its roots. Sometimes the son would stand there at dusk, the camera in his hands, the light fading golden across the branches. He would lift the lens and take a single photo, of the leaves, the shadows, the quiet space where love had failed but life had not. The ring had meant nothing to her, but to him, it had come to mean everything that survived after meaning was gone: forgiveness, endurance, and the still, stubborn beauty of what remains. Autumn arrived quietly, soft and golden, as if the world had finally grown tired of hurting. The house stood calm now, no ghosts in its walls, no secrets in its corners. Only the steady rhythm of life continuing. The garden had grown wild again, but the son didn't mind. The small tree his father had planted stood tall, its leaves whispering when the wind passed through, its roots holding everything they had buried: ring, chain, letters, years of silence and truth. He visited it every morning, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but his thoughts. The earth beneath his feet had become sacred, not because of who was gone, but because of what it represented: all the pain that had finally learned to rest. He had taken up photography again. At first, he thought it would hurt, that looking through a lens would bring back the ghosts of Betrayal, the way his stepmother's hand had once reached for someone else. But now, when he raised the camera, he found something different in its frame. He saw light falling through leaves, the curve of the horizon, the faint smile of strangers unaware of being seen. Life in its simplest form. One day, he came across an old memory card buried at the bottom of a drawer. It was hers, the last thing he had from her, forgotten all these years. His heart stuttered as he slid it into the camera. The photos loaded one by one. The garden, the father fixing a chair. The son, much younger, asleep on the couch. There was tenderness in every shot, even in her distance. In one photo, her hand reached into the frame, blurry, as if she had meant to erase herself before it was too late. He stared at that image for a long time. It was the closest thing to a confession she had ever given. That evening, he printed the photo and placed it on the mantel beside the others, their family. Before the lies, his father smiling by the tree, the house in summer light. The new picture didn't replace anything. It simply joined the rest, completing the story that time had softened into something almost merciful. As dusk settled, he went to the garden. The air smelled of earth and rain. He crouched beside the tree and spoke quietly. Not knowing who he was talking to anymore, his father, his stepmother, himself. "It's all still here," he said. "Everything. But it doesn't hurt now." The leaves rustled gently, and he felt it then, the strange, tender truth that even betrayal can become memory, and memory can become peace. He lifted his camera once more, pointed it toward the fading sky, and took a picture. The shutter clicked softly, capturing not people, not pain, but the space between them, the silence that had turned into forgiveness. When he printed the photo later, the image was nothing but branches, sky, and light breaking through. No faces, no ghosts. Just proof that even after everything had fallen apart, something beautiful had dared to remain. Years later, when strangers passed by the old garden, they would see the tree rising against the light and never know the weight of what slept beneath its roots. But the son, older now, quieter, would remember. He would touch the bark, feel the pulse of life inside it, and understand that the ring had never needed to mean anything at all. It was only ever a symbol, fragile and empty. What truly mattered had grown from its burial, the proof that love, even broken, could leave behind something alive. And as the evening wind moved through the leaves, the camera hanging at his side, he smiled, not with sorrow, but with peace. The story was over, yet its echo remained, soft as light through autumn air.